determination, it had taken him just one day to turn everyone against me. 24 hours earlier, he'd cornered me after the promotion announcement. "You need to publicly thank me for making you who you are," he'd insisted. "Tell everyone I trained you, that I'm the reason you're here." I'd refused. "My success isn't because of you, it's despite you." His eyes had narrowed. "You'll regret this." Now, facing this ambush meeting, I realized how thoroughly he'd planned my downfall. "I'm calling an emergency board meeting," I announced. "Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Dexter laughed. "Good luck with that. I've already spoken to most of them." Walking back to my office, panic set in. I'd overcome countless obstacles, growing up in foster care, working multiple jobs to put myself through college, enduring years of his subtle sabotage, but this coordinated attack might be too much. I hadn't wanted this job for the title. I wanted it because I had plans, real improvements for our workforce, innovations our industry needed. He'd always dismissed my ideas as cute and impractical. Now he was determined to erase me completely. That night, instead of preparing elaborate defenses, I made an unexpected decision. I visited our production facilities. The night shift workers were surprised to see the new CEO arriving at 2 a.m., even more shocked when I asked about their daily challenges. I repeated this at 3 more locations before dawn. By morning, I'd spoken with over 100 employees, people whose names Dexter had never bothered to learn in his 20 years with the company. I arrived at the board meeting, exhausted but resolute. He walked in last, his confident stride faltering when he saw what awaited him. I watched his expression change from smug certainty to confusion, then alarm. His eyes darted around the room, taking in not just the board members, but the faces he'd never bothered to acknowledge. His hand gripped the doorframe, knuckles whitening. "What is this?" he whispered. "If you're enjoying this story of workplace revenge and corporate justice, please like this video and subscribe to hear more tales of triumph over toxic leadership. I promise the way this unfolds will be worth your time. Let me know in the comments if you've ever witnessed someone get exactly what they deserved in a professional setting. My name is Astrid. Before I was CEO, before I was even management, I was just the woman who answered phones with a business degree and big dreams, the woman who stayed late to learn every aspect of the company, the woman whose ideas were stolen by Dexter for 8 consecutive years. I grew up bouncing between foster homes in rural Michigan, never staying anywhere long enough to call it home. My belongings fit in a single duffel bag until I was 17. College was a pipe dream until my final foster mother, a community college administrative assistant, helped me secure scholarships and grants. I graduated with honors, sending out 200 applications before landing the receptionist position. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a foot in the door. I answered phones with the same intensity other people reserved for solving complex equations, learning caller patterns, memorizing extension numbers, understanding the company's operations through its communication flow. After 6 months, I submitted a detailed analysis of our call patterns with suggestions for improved efficiency. My immediate supervisor was impressed enough to show it to her manager, who shared it with his director. That's when Dexter first noticed me. He called me to his office, praised my initiative, and promptly implemented my changes without acknowledging their source. When quarterly metrics showed a 16% improvement in customer response time, he accepted congratulations from the executive team with a practiced modesty that made my skin crawl. "Just doing my job," he'd said, catching my eye across the break room. Spotting talent and developing it, that established our pattern for the next decade and a half. I would work twice as hard as anyone else, generate ideas that solved persistent problems. And Dexter would position himself as the visionary who'd guided the development of those solutions. When I was promoted to customer service representative, then team lead, then manager, each step came with Dexter's mentorship, which consisted mainly of him taking credit for my work, while explaining to me how I should be grateful for the opportunities he provided. "You know, Astrid," he once told me after I'd spent a weekend rebuilding our customer tracking system, "most people in your position wouldn't get these chances. Starting where you did, you should be thankful I see something worth developing." I learned to document everything meticulously. Every idea, every implementation plan, every result, all stored where he couldn't access them. I wasn't sure what I was saving them for, but something told me the record would matter someday. As I moved up through middle management, I started building real relationships with employees at all levels, not the superficial leadership visibility Dexter practiced at company picnics, but genuine connections built on mutual respect. I learned about production bottlenecks from assembly workers, shipping challenges from logistics personnel, and customer pain points from service representatives. When I presented improvement strategies in management meetings, Dexter would inevitably find ways to dismiss them, only to resurrect altered versions weeks later as his own insights. Astrid has an admirable enthusiasm, he'd say when I objected, but lacks the big picture understanding needed at the executive level. Despite his efforts to contain my influence, the results I generated caught the attention of our board chairperson, Geneva. A straight-talking former operations executive, she began inviting me to present at quarterly board reviews. "The numbers from your division are consistently outperforming projections," she noted during one session. "What's your secret?" "No secret," I replied. "I listen to the people doing the work." Dexter interrupted smoothly. "What Astrid means is that she implements the strategic framework I've established for management-employee communication." Geneva's gaze had shifted between us, her expression unreadable. 2 months later, our CEO announced his retirement. The board began a search for his replacement, considering both internal and external candidates. Dexter, as Chief Operating Officer, was widely considered the heir apparent. He'd been positioning himself for years, cultivating relationships with board members and industry influencers. I applied as well, not expecting serious consideration but wanting my vision for the company on record. The interview process was grueling, 5 rounds over 6 weeks, culminating in presentations to the full board. Dexter's presentation was polished, focused on market expansion and acquisition opportunities. Mine centered on operational excellence and employee empowerment as foundations for sustainable growth. The day the board announced their decision remains etched in my memory. The executive team gathered in the conference room, tension thick enough to touch. Geneva entered, her expression neutral. "After careful consideration," she began, "the board has selected our new chief executive officer." Dexter straightened his tie, his expression already victorious. "Astrid Morgan will assume the role, effective immediately." The silence was absolute. I felt a curious lightness, as if gravity had momentarily suspended. Then Dexter laughed, a short, incredulous sound that died when he realized no one was joining him. "This must be a mistake," he said, looking directly at Geneva. "The board was unanimous," she replied. "Astrid's vision for the company aligns with our long-term objectives." The congratulations from others were stiff, perfunctory. Dexter said nothing, simply watching me with an expression that made me instinctively check my office for security vulnerabilities later that day. He cornered me that afternoon, demanding I credit him publicly for my success. When I refused, I saw something shift in his eyes, calculation replacing anger. That should have warned me. The next day came the ambush meeting with the management team, their sudden unified front against me. Decades of relationship building seemed to evaporate overnight as Dexter activated his network of allegiances, favors, and shared secrets. Now, as I stood facing what remained of my career after just 2 days as CEO, I felt a strange calm replace my initial panic. This wasn't just about my job anymore. This was about every person in the company whose voice had been ignored by Dexter's leadership style. My late-night visits to our facilities had revealed systemic issues he'd buried for years. Safety protocols ignored to hit production targets. Harassment complaints dismissed to protect high-performing managers. Quality concerns overridden to maintain delivery schedules. The emergency board meeting I'd called wasn't just my defense. It was an intervention for a company culture that had been slowly poisoned. As Dexter stood frozen in the doorway of the boardroom, taking in the unexpected assembly of employees from every level of the company, I watched realization dawn on his face. This wasn't going to follow his script. "What exactly is happening here?" he demanded, his voice lower now, controlled but with an edge of uncertainty. I met his gaze steadily. "We're having an honest conversation about the state of this company, something long overdue." His eyes narrowed as he scanned the faces around the table. Maintenance workers, production supervisors, HR specialists, people whose concerns he'd dismissed for years. These people don't belong in a board meeting, he said, looking to the board members for support. This is highly irregular and completely unprofessional. Geneva folded her hands on the table. I approved this format, Dexter. Please take a seat. He remained standing. May I ask why my 20 years of executive experience is being undermined by a room full of staff? A muscle technician named Pax stood up. That's exactly the problem, sir. You've never seen us as anything but staff, not as people with valuable insights about the work we do every day. I've created the most profitable division in company history. Dexter snapped. I don't need Dext. You've created the division with the highest reported profit, interrupted Wren from accounting. But we've been tracking the hidden costs of your methods. She slid a folder toward the center of the table. The turnover rates in your division are triple the industry average. The workers' compensation claims from safety violations have been classified under different expense categories to hide the pattern. Dexter's face paled slightly. These are complex operational matters that entry-level employees don't have the context to understand. I watched him struggling to regain control of the narrative, to reposition himself as the experienced voice of reason against emotional subordinates. It was a technique I'd seen him employ countless times. Perhaps, I suggested quietly, we should let them speak, and you can provide that context afterward. For the next 2 hours, employees detailed specific instances where Dexter had overridden safety concerns, buried harassment complaints, and taken credit for innovations developed by his team. Each speaker was calm, factual, and devastatingly specific. Dexter's rebuttals grew increasingly defensive. When a shipping coordinator described being denied essential equipment despite multiple accident reports, Dexter claimed budget constraints beyond his control. When a product designer revealed how her patented innovation had been presented as Dexter's brainchild to the executive team, he dismissed it as a misunderstanding about collaborative work. His eyes kept returning to mine, his expression shifting from anger to disbelief to something approaching fear. This is a coordinated character assassination, he finally declared. Astrid has clearly orchestrated this to solidify her position. I invited these employees to speak, I acknowledged. But every word they've said has been their own. You've had 15 years to listen to them, Dexter. You chose not to. The board members exchanged glances. Geneva cleared her throat. I think we've heard enough to understand there are serious leadership issues that predate Astrid's appointment. The question now is how we move forward. Dexter straightened, smoothing his expression into something more controlled. I admit I may have been overly focused on results rather than process. If the board wishes, I can implement a more inclusive management approach going forward. That won't be necessary, Geneva replied. The board reaffirms its decision to appoint Astrid as CEO. Furthermore, we believe a reorganization of the executive structure is warranted. Dexter's smile froze. What exactly does that mean? Geneva looked him directly in the eyes. It means we'll be conducting a comprehensive review of your division's operations, reporting structures, and personnel decisions over the past 5 years. You can't possibly, he began, then stopped himself. That seems excessive for what amounts to differences in management style. This goes beyond management style, said one of the board members, a retired judge named Imran. What we've heard today suggests potential liability issues that the company must address. Dexter looked around the room, searching for allies among the executives and finding none. The united front he'd cultivated against me had evaporated in the face of overwhelming testimony. I've given 20 years to this company, he said, his voice tight. My record speaks for itself. Yes, I agreed softly. It does. He turned to me then, and in his eyes I saw a calculation taking place, measuring what he knew against what might have been discovered, assessing how much damage control was possible. Perhaps, he said carefully, we should continue this discussion privately, Astrid. I believe there's room for a mutually beneficial resolution. What did you have in mind? I asked, maintaining a neutral expression. He glanced at the others. Something that preserves the stability of the company while acknowledging everyone's contributions appropriately. I understood what he was suggesting, a negotiated peace that would allow him to save face and possibly retain his position. For a moment, I considered it, the path of least resistance, the political solution. Then I remembered the night shift workers describing how their equipment maintenance requests had been repeatedly denied. The junior designer who'd been transferred to an isolated branch office after rejecting Dexter's advances. The safety officer who'd been dismissed for creating unnecessary concerns when he reported violations. I looked at Dexter, really looked at him, and saw not the intimidating figure who had dominated my professional life for 15 years, but simply a man who had built his career on taking credit for other people's work and silencing those who questioned him. I think, I said carefully, that everything should be on the record. Complete transparency is the only way forward. His expression hardened as he realized I wasn't going to offer him an escape route. "You'll regret this," he said quietly, the same words he'd used the day before. But this time, they sounded hollow. What happened next would change everything, not just for Dexter and me, but for the entire company. Geneva folded the folder shut and addressed the room. "This meeting will reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m. The board will deliberate on next steps. In the meantime, Dexter, you are placed on administrative leave pending our investigation." The blood drained from his face. Administrative leave? Based on unsubstantiated claims from disgruntled employees? Imran, the former judge, leaned forward. "We have sufficient cause for concern. Your access to company systems will be temporarily restricted until we complete our review." Dexter's gaze darted around the room, landing on each executive's face. The same people who'd stood with him against me yesterday now avoided eye contact. He was watching his carefully constructed alliance crumble in real time. "You're making a critical mistake," he said, voice tight with restraint. "The operational disruption alone will be managed." I finished. "The company survived before you. It will survive during this investigation." He turned to me then, his expression no longer guarded. Raw fury flashed in his eyes, a glimpse of something ugly I'd always sensed beneath his polished exterior. "You engineered this," he hissed, low enough that only I could hear. "You won't last a month without me." Security arrived to escort him from the building. I watched through the window as he stood in the parking lot, staring back at the headquarters with such intensity I could feel it through the glass. He made a call, spoke briefly, then drove away with a screech of tires. I turned back to find Geneva watching me. "That was exceptionally well handled, Astrid. But you've made a powerful enemy." "He was always my enemy," I replied. "The difference is that now it's in the open." The following weeks were chaotic. Dexter's absence revealed the extent to which he'd centralized control. Critical information was fragmented across protected files. Decision-making processes existed only in his head. Key vendor relationships turned out to be personal rather than institutional. "He designed it this way," noted Tay, our technical operations lead. "The company literally couldn't function without him, or so he thought." I established cross-functional teams to reconstruct processes, implement proper documentation, and create transparent workflows. The initial inefficiency was painful, but gradually a more resilient organization emerged. 3 weeks after the boardroom confrontation, I received the first message. "Enjoying my office? Don't get too comfortable." It came from an anonymous number. I showed it to our head of security, who increased surveillance around the building and arranged for monitoring of my home. The board's investigation proceeded methodically. HR interviews, financial audits, technical reviews of data access patterns. The picture that emerged was more troubling than even I had suspected. Ren from accounting appeared at my office door one afternoon, her expression grim. "We found something you should see." She placed a flash drive on my desk. "These are historical budget allocations for the manufacturing division. The official records versus the actual expenditures. The discrepancies were substantial. Funds allocated for equipment upgrades, safety improvements, and training programs had been diverted elsewhere. On paper, these investments had been made. In reality, the money had disappeared. "Where did it go?" I asked. "We're still tracing that," Ren replied, "but we've identified several shell companies that received consulting fees, companies with no employees, no offices, and no deliverables." The investigation expanded to include external auditors and, eventually, regulatory compliance officers. What had begun as an internal power struggle was evolving into something far more serious. Through it all, I focused on rebuilding the company, daily operations, employee morale, customer relationships. The work kept me centered as the storm gathered around Dexter's misconduct. The anonymous messages continued. They'll blame you too when the stock drops. Ask Geneva about her vacation last year. Who do you think arranged it? The board will turn on you next. They always need a scapegoat. Each message was designed to seed doubt, to isolate me, to make me question my allies. I shared them all with our security team and the board, refusing to let them fester in secret. 6 weeks after Dexter's departure, Geneva called me to her office. She looked tired, the investigation taking its toll on her as well. The preliminary findings are complete, she said, sliding a thick report across her desk. It's worse than we thought. The document detailed a systematic pattern of financial mismanagement, ethical violations, and possible criminal conduct spanning most of Dexter's tenure. Embezzlement disguised as consulting fees, harassment settlements buried in accounting codes, safety violations concealed from regulators. The board will meet tomorrow to review these findings, Geneva continued. We'll likely need to self-report to regulatory authorities. I nodded, the weight of the situation settling over me. What happens to the company? That depends partly on how proactively we address this, and how effectively you lead through the crisis. That night, I received another message. Tomorrow will be interesting. Hope you've updated your resume. I barely slept, reviewing contingency plans for various scenarios. When my alarm sounded at 5 a.m., I'd been awake for hours already. The board meeting was scheduled for 8 a.m. I arrived at 7, wanting time to prepare. The parking garage was nearly empty, my footsteps echoing in the concrete space. As I approached my car after retrieving a forgotten file, a figure stepped from behind a support column. Dexter. He looked different, unshaven, eyes bloodshot, his normally immaculate appearance noticeably diminished. The confident executive had been replaced by something more volatile. We need to talk, he said, blocking my path to the elevator. I stepped back, creating distance between us. Any communication should go through the legal team. He laughed bitterly. Always so proper, Astrid. So by the book. That's why you were easy to control for so long. I'm late for a meeting, I replied, reaching for my phone. The board's going to throw me to the wolves, he said. You know that, right? They'll sacrifice me to protect themselves and the company. Your actions have consequences, Dexter. His expression hardened. I built this company. Everything valuable about it came from my vision, my connections, my work. Is that what you tell yourself? It's the truth, he insisted, stepping closer. And now they'll erase me, make me the villain, while they keep benefiting from everything I created. You had choices, I said. Every step of the way, you chose personal gain over ethical leadership. Something shifted in his eyes, a dangerous calculation. You think you're so different? So pure? I know things about this company that would implicate everyone in the C-suite, including your precious Geneva. Then share that with the investigators, I replied, moving toward the stairwell door since he still blocked the elevator. There's still a way out, he said, his voice suddenly calmer. For both of us. I paused, hand on the door. What are you suggesting? A united front, you and me, presenting a narrative of misunderstandings and procedural oversights. No malice, no criminal intent, just administrative failures that we're committed to rectifying. You want me to help you cover up fraud? I want you to be smart, he snapped. This investigation will damage the company, maybe fatally. Thousands of jobs lost. Your grand vision for employee empowerment dead before it starts. For a moment, I considered how easy it would be to compromise, to find middle ground, to avoid the pain of a public scandal. What exactly would this arrangement involve? I asked, watching his reaction carefully. Hope flickered across his face. He thought I was yielding. Simple. You tell the board you've reviewed the findings and believe there's been a misinterpretation of normal business practices. You recommend an internal correction rather than external disclosure. In exchange, I resign quietly, with standard severance, and non-disparagement agreements. And the employees whose safety was compromised? The women who were harassed? The shareholders who were defrauded? He waved dismissively. Compensation packages, non-disclosure agreements, standard practice for mitigating corporate liability. All neat and tidy, I said. All swept away. Exactly. He smiled, thinking he'd won. Business continues. Jobs protected. Your leadership unquestioned. I studied him, seeing clearly for the first time how his mind worked, how utterly transactional his view of the world was, how completely he believed everyone could be bought or manipulated at the right price. No, I said simply. His smile vanished. Excuse me? The answer is no. I won't help you escape accountability. His expression contorted. You self-righteous bitch. You think this is about justice? This is about your vendetta against me. This is about doing what's right for the company and the people who work there. You'll regret this, he said, the threat in his voice unmistakable. When this company collapses and everyone blames the CEO who could have prevented it, you'll wish you'd listened to me. Security arrived then, alerted by the silent alarm I'd triggered on my phone. They escorted him from the property, adding trespassing to his growing list of offenses. Shaken, I made my way to the boardroom. The encounter had rattled me more than I wanted to admit. Not because of Dexter's threats, but because for a fleeting moment, I'd actually considered his offer. The board meeting proceeded as scheduled. The investigation findings were presented in excruciating detail. The directors asked thoughtful, often painful questions: financial implications, legal exposure, remediation options. We need to decide how to proceed, Geneva said finally. Our choices, broadly speaking, are to self-report to authorities or to handle this internally. The room fell silent. Self-reporting meant potential criminal charges, massive financial penalties, and devastating publicity. Internal resolution meant containing the damage, but also, in some sense, perpetuating the cover-up. All eyes turned to me. As CEO, I began carefully, my recommendation is based on what's best for the company's long-term health, not what's easiest or most comfortable in the short term. I detailed my plan: full disclosure to authorities, cooperation with any resulting investigation, transparent communication with employees and shareholders, and comprehensive remediation for those harmed. This will be painful, I acknowledged. Our stock will suffer. Our reputation will be damaged. We may face significant financial penalties, but the alternative, continuing to hide these violations, will ultimately be more destructive. The debate was intense. Several directors argued passionately for internal resolution. Others supported full disclosure. The division mirrored wider ethical questions in business. IMT. When does protection become complicity? In the end, my recommendation prevailed by a narrow margin. We would self-report and face the consequences openly. As the meeting concluded, Geneva pulled me aside. That couldn't have been easy, especially after your encounter with Dexter this morning. I looked at her, surprised. The security team told you? Of course. I'm still board chair. She studied me. Were you tempted by his offer? Briefly, I admitted. The easy path is always tempting. She nodded. That's why we chose you, Astrid. Not because you never feel the temptation, but because you recognize it and choose differently. The following days were a blur of activity: legal briefings, press statements, employee communications. The stock dropped 22% when the news broke. Company name scandal trended on social media. Business journalists dissected our statement, speculating about criminal charges and leadership failures. Dexter was interviewed on a financial news program, presenting himself as a scapegoat for standard industry practices. This is what happens when you put inexperienced people in charge, he told the earnest anchor. They panic at normal business operations they don't understand. The narrative he crafted was compelling. The seasoned executive sacrificed by a nervous board and an insecure new CEO desperate to establish authority. Some media outlets adopted his framing. Industry commentators questioned whether the company had overreacted. For a moment, it seemed Dexter might actually emerge from the scandal with his reputation intact, possibly even enhanced as the voice of reason against corporate overcorrection. Then, something unexpected happened. Employees began speaking out, not just to investigators or journalists, but directly to the public through social media. Assembly line workers describing safety concerns ignored for years. Administrative assistants detailing hostile work environments. Engineers explaining how innovations were suppressed if they didn't originate with Dexter. Hundreds of individual stories coalesced into a powerful counter-narrative. Not carefully crafted corporate communications, but authentic voices describing lived experiences. Niev, a quality control specialist, created a video that went viral. I reported brake component failures for 8 months. Dexter's response was to transfer me to packaging. 3 months later, there was a recall after accidents were reported. He knew. He chose profit over safety. Hakeem, a former HR manager, published emails showing how harassment complaints against executives were systematically buried. I was told these incidents didn't meet the threshold for investigation. The actual threshold was whether the accused was in Dexter's protected circle. The public sentiment shifted. Regulatory investigators accelerated their inquiry. Former business partners began distancing themselves from Dexter. Through it all, I focused on rebuilding, new safety protocols, revised financial controls, enhanced reporting mechanisms for ethical concerns. The work was exhausting but essential. 3 months after the board meeting, federal authorities announced formal charges against Dexter: securities fraud, wire fraud, obstruction of justice. The company was cooperating fully, having self-reported the violations. The day of his arraignment, I received one final anonymous message. "Hope you're satisfied. You've destroyed everything." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The criminal proceedings would stretch on for more than a year. The company's recovery would take even longer. Both processes would unfold in the harsh spotlight of public scrutiny and regulatory oversight. But something unexpected emerged from the crisis: a stronger, more resilient organization. Employees who had been silenced found their voices. Processes that had been opaque became transparent. Values that had been merely slogans became actual practice. 6 months into the transformation, I finally cleared out Dexter's old office, which I'd been too busy to address until then. Behind his desk, I found a framed mission statement he'd commissioned, full of grand language about integrity and excellence. As I removed it from the wall, I noticed something tucked behind the frame: a small notebook. Inside were names, dates, and cryptic notations. It took me a moment to understand what I was seeing. It was Dexter's record of leverage, NEN, personal information about colleagues, board members, and business partners, drinking problems, marital infidelities, financial difficulties, health issues, notes on how each vulnerability could be exploited if necessary. The final page had a section labeled Astrid. Under my name was a single sentence: "No exploitable weaknesses identified. Presents as too perfect. Dig deeper." I closed the notebook, suddenly understanding something fundamental about Dexter that had eluded me for years. His worldview wasn't just transactional, it was fundamentally predatory. He viewed people exclusively as either threats to be neutralized or resources to be exploited. The revelation was oddly freeing. His opposition to me had never been about my performance or qualifications. It was about his inability to control me through the normal mechanisms of leverage he applied to others. That night, I stayed late reviewing production statistics. Our output had finally returned to pre-crisis levels. Quality metrics were actually improving. Employee turnover had decreased significantly. As I prepared to leave, Pax from maintenance appeared at my door. The same technician who had stood up to Dexter in the boardroom months earlier. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Of course. What can I help with?" He entered, seeming uncharacteristically hesitant. "Some of us were talking about everything that's happened, about what comes next. I'm listening." He handed me a folder. "This is a proposal from the production team. A new workflow design that we think could increase efficiency while reducing physical strain on workers." I opened the folder, scanning the detailed diagrams and implementation plan. "This is impressive work. We've been developing it for months," he explained. "But we were afraid to bring it forward until now." "Afraid?" He nodded. "Under the old leadership, suggesting changes often led to problems. The implications were clear: Innovation had been actively suppressed unless it originated from or could be credited to Dexter. This changes today, I said, standing to emphasize my point. I want you to present this at next week's operations review. Full credit to your team. His expression shifted from hesitation to cautious optimism. You're serious? Absolutely. This company's strength is its people, all of its people. The more voices contributing to our success, the stronger we become. After he left, I stood at the window overlooking the production facility. Lights blazed in the manufacturing area where the night shift was hard at work. In the distance, distribution trucks moved steadily through the loading bays. The company was healing, finding its way forward. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more challenges, more difficult decisions, more moments of doubt. But for the first time since taking the CEO position, I felt genuine hope, not just for survival, but for transformation. Something stronger and more ethical was emerging from the ashes of Dexter's regime. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Dexter's legal troubles were expanding. New charges filed, additional co-conspirators named, his carefully constructed world continuing to unravel. I put the phone away, turning back to the work at hand. His story was no longer mine to worry about. I had a company to rebuild, employees to support, and a future to create. As I gathered my things to leave, Geneva texted, "Board meeting tomorrow. Be prepared for some resistance to the new compensation structure." I smiled, welcoming the challenge. This was what real leadership looked like, not domination or control, but the constant work of building consensus around worthy goals. Outside, the night air was cool against my face. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a few cars belonging to other late workers. I paused, taking in the sprawling facility that had been my professional home for 15 years. For so long, this place had been defined by Dexter's influence, his priorities, his methods, his vision. Now, it was becoming something else entirely, something better. My phone rang. It was Ren from accounting. "Sorry to call so late," she said, her voice tense. "But we found something in the international accounts. Something big. You need to see this right away," Ren continued. "Can you come back to the office?" 20 minutes later, we sat in the financial department's conference room. Spreadsheets and transaction records spread across the table. We were auditing the international subsidiaries, Ren explained, pointing to a series of highlighted entries. "There's a pattern of transactions between our Singapore office and these 3 entities in the Cayman Islands. The numbers were substantial, millions flowing through seemingly legitimate business channels, then fragmenting into smaller transactions before disappearing into private accounts." "How long has this been happening?" I asked. "At least 7 years, Ren replied. "It's sophisticated. The initial transfers appear completely legitimate. Consultant fees, vendor payments, partnership distributions. But when we traced where the money ultimately went," she slid a document toward me. It was a bank statement. The account holder's name made my heart skip. Dexter's wife, Kara. "There's more," Ren said quietly. "Much more." By midnight, the picture was clear. Beyond the financial mismanagement we'd already uncovered was something far more deliberate. A systematic embezzlement scheme that had diverted nearly $34 million to offshore accounts controlled by Dexter and his associates. "The federal investigators need to see this immediately," I said. Ren nodded. "There's one more thing you should know." She hesitated. "These transactions required dual authorization. Someone else in senior management was involved." My mind raced through possibilities. "Who?" "We're still connecting the dots, but the authorization codes point to." She swallowed. Vincent, our chief financial officer. One of the executives who had sided with Dexter against me in those early days, but who had since become one of my most vocal supporters in the recovery efforts. The betrayal stung, but it also explained something that had bothered me: how smoothly Vincent had pivoted from Dexter's ally to my apparent advocate, not from genuine conviction, but from self-preservation. "Let's keep this between us for now," I said. "Continue gathering evidence, but be discreet. I need time to consider next steps." That night, sleep eluded me. I paced my apartment, weighing options, considering consequences. By dawn, I had a plan, not just for addressing this new discovery, but for bringing the entire situation to its necessary conclusion. I arrived at the office earlier than usual, requested an urgent meeting with Geneva, and laid out what we'd found. "This changes everything," she said, her expression grim. "The federal investigation will expand significantly. More executives implicated, larger financial impact, greater public scrutiny. There's another dimension to consider," I added. "The timing." "What do you mean?" "Dexter's trial begins next week. This new evidence will substantially strengthen the prosecution's case." Geneva studied me. "You have something specific in mind." It wasn't a question. After months of working closely together through the crisis, she'd learned to read my measured tone. "I do," I confirmed. "Something that serves justice while protecting the company's future." The next morning, Vincent requested a private meeting. His normally confident demeanor was replaced by barely concealed anxiety. "I've been reflecting on my role during Dexter's tenure," he began, not quite meeting my eyes. "There were times I should have asked more questions, demanded more transparency." I watched him construct his narrative in real time, positioning himself as negligent rather than complicit. "What specifically prompted this reflection?" I asked. He shifted in his chair. "Professional responsibility, ethical consideration. The company's recovery has made me reconsider many aspects of our previous operations." "Interesting timing," I observed, just as we begin reviewing international financial structures. A flicker of alarm crossed his face, quickly suppressed. "Is there a specific concern with those accounts?" "Nothing we can't address through proper oversight," I replied, revealing nothing. "I appreciate your commitment to improvement, Vincent." After he left, I called our general counsel. "We need to accelerate the timeline. Vincent knows something's happening." The next week unfolded with precise, deliberate steps. Additional auditors were assigned to international accounts. Security protocols around financial systems were enhanced. Key documents were secured with chain-of-custody procedures. Through it all, I maintained a facade of routine operations, budget reviews, product development meetings, facility tours. The normal rhythm of corporate leadership continued uninterrupted. Dexter's trial began with the expected media circus. Financial journalists, legal analysts, industry observers, all gathered to witness the downfall of a once celebrated executive. I attended the opening day, sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom. Dexter entered wearing an expertly tailored suit, his attorney beside him, his expression confident despite the circumstances. He scanned the gallery, his gaze locking with mine for a brief moment before dismissing me with a slight smirk. He still believed he would prevail. That belief was written in every line of his posture. The prosecution's opening statement outlined a case focused on the financial violations we'd initially reported. Serious charges, but limited in scope compared to what we now knew. For 3 days, I watched the proceedings unfold exactly as Dexter anticipated. His defense team challenged evidence, questioned witness credibility, and constructed alternative explanations for the documented violations, technical discrepancies, procedural misunderstandings, delegated responsibilities. The narrative emerging was precisely what he had suggested in the parking garage months earlier: administrative failures rather than deliberate fraud. His attorney positioned him as perhaps negligent in oversight but not criminally culpable. Some jurors appeared receptive to this framing. The prosecution's case, while methodically presented, lacked the emotional impact needed to overcome the defense's technical objections. On the 4th day, I received a text from the lead federal prosecutor. "It's time." I left the courtroom during the lunch recess and didn't return. The real work was happening elsewhere. That evening, federal agents executed simultaneous search warrants at multiple locations: Vincent's home, the office of Dexter's personal attorney, and the small accounting firm that had managed the offshore entities. The evidence gathered was comprehensive and damning: electronic records, physical documents, witness statements. The full architecture of the embezzlement scheme laid bare. When court reconvened the next morning, the prosecution requested a brief recess to confer with the judge. What followed was a seismic shift in the proceedings. New charges were filed, additional defendants named. The scope of the case expanded dramatically. I wasn't in the courtroom when it happened, but Geneva was. She described the moment Dexter realized what was happening, how his composure cracked as the judge detailed the new evidence, how he turned to his attorney in growing panic, how his eyes darted around the courtroom, seeking escape that didn't exist. By evening, the story dominated business news. Massive fraud scheme uncovered. Multiple executives implicated. Tens of millions diverted to private accounts. Vincent was arrested, leaving his home with packed suitcases and multiple passports. Two other executives, both loyal Dexter allies who had left the company during the initial investigation, were taken into custody at airports. Dexter's attorney requested an emergency bail hearing, citing changed circumstances. The judge denied the request, deeming him an enhanced flight risk given the expanded charges. For the next 2 weeks, I focused entirely on steadying the company through this new phase of the crisis. Employee communications, investor briefings, customer reassurance. The work was intense but necessary. The trial resumed with a dramatically different tone. The confident defendant was replaced by a visibly shaken man in detention center attire. His high-powered defense team, recognizing the overwhelming evidence, shifted strategy toward damage mitigation. Plea negotiations began. The prosecution, armed with ironclad documentation of years of deliberate fraud, held the stronger position. 3 days later, Geneva called. It's done. Dexter's accepted a plea deal. The terms were severe. Guilty pleas to 14 federal charges, forfeiture of all ill-gotten assets, and a recommended sentence of 18 to 22 years. His attorney tried to include a non-disclosure provision, Geneva added. The prosecutor refused. That detail mattered. No confidentiality meant the full story could be told, not just the legal outcome, but the human impact of Dexter's actions. The following morning, I received an unexpected request. Dexter wanted to meet with me before his formal sentencing. No attorneys present, just the two of us. Every instinct warned against it. There was nothing to gain. The legal outcome was settled. The company was moving forward. Yet something compelled me to agree. Perhaps the need for closure. Perhaps curiosity about what he could possibly want to say. The meeting was arranged in a small conference room at the Federal Detention Center. I arrived early, underwent security screening, and waited in the sterile space. When Dexter entered, I barely recognized him. The physical transformation was startling. His carefully maintained appearance had deteriorated. The confident posture replaced by a defeated slouch. Only his eyes retained their calculating intensity. He sat across from me, hands folded on the table. Neither of us spoke immediately, the silence stretching uncomfortably. "Thank you for coming," he finally said, his voice rougher than I remembered. I nodded but offered nothing more. "I wanted to understand," he continued, "how you did it, how you managed to unravel everything so completely." "You mean how we discovered your fraud?" I asked. "That was inevitable once we started looking closely." He shook his head. "Not the discovery, the execution, the way you orchestrated it all. It was," he hesitated, "it was masterful. The compliment, if that's what it was, felt hollow. There was no master plan, Dexter, just a commitment to transparency and accountability." He studied me, searching for something in my expression. "You expect me to believe this wasn't about revenge? That you didn't carefully calculate each step to ensure maximum damage?" "I didn't need to calculate anything," I replied evenly. "Your actions created their own consequences." He leaned forward, voice dropping. "You gathered evidence for years. You built alliances with board members. You positioned yourself perfectly to take control when the moment came. Then you systematically dismantled everything I built. Is that how you see it?" I asked. "That I orchestrated your downfall rather than you creating it yourself?" "We both know what really happened," he insisted. "You waited. You planned. You executed when I was vulnerable." I considered his perspective, how different it was from reality, yet how consistent with his worldview. He couldn't conceive of actions not driven by the same predatory calculation that guided his own choices. "What do you want from this conversation, Dexter?" His expression shifted, something almost like respect crossing his features. "To acknowledge a worthy opponent. You beat me at my own game. That's where you're wrong," I said. "I never played your game. I refused to. Then, what would you call this? He gestured to his detention center uniform. I'm facing 2 decades in prison. My assets are seized. My reputation destroyed. If that's not victory for you, what is? I thought carefully before answering. Justice isn't victory. It's restoration. It's making things right. He laughed, a harsh sound without humor. Noble sentiments from the person sitting on the other side of the table. This isn't about where either of us is sitting, I replied. It's about choices and consequences. His expression hardened. Save the moral lecture. We both know you're enjoying this. The perfect revenge served cold. I stood, suddenly tired of the conversation. That's the difference between us, Dexter. You think this was about you? It never was. It was about the company, the employees, the customers, the investors, all the people harmed by your actions. As I turned to leave, he called after me. When you're sitting in that office, making the hard decisions year after year, you'll understand. You'll become me eventually. Everyone does. I paused at the door, looking back at him. No, Dexter. That's just what you tell yourself to justify your choices. Not everyone chooses as you did. His face contorted with sudden anger. You think you're better? More ethical? More principled? You used me to advance your career for 15 years, then discarded me when it served your purposes. The accusation hung in the air between us. I worked for the company. I corrected him. I contributed value and was compensated for it. That's not using you. That's doing my job. The difference is that I never confused the company with myself. He stared at me, his expression unreadable. So that's it? No gloating? No satisfaction in seeing me ruined? I considered the question honestly. There's satisfaction in seeing justice done, in knowing the company can heal now, in watching employees thrive without fear. If that's what you mean, then yes, there's satisfaction. Always the perfect answer, he muttered. Always above it all. As I reached for the door handle, he spoke again, his voice different now, smaller, almost vulnerable. Was there ever a moment when you could have been convinced? In the parking garage that day, if I'd said something different, offered something else, was there any chance? The question surprised me with its naked honesty. For the first time in our 15-year history, Dexter was asking something without calculation. No, I said simply. There wasn't. I left him there, seated at the metal table in the bare conference room, and didn't look back. The formal sentencing took place 2 weeks later. 18 years in federal prison, forfeiture of $34.7 million in illegally obtained assets, restitution to the company and its shareholders. I attended with Geneva, sitting quietly as the judge delivered a scathing assessment of the damage caused by Dexter's actions. Not just financial harm, but the human cost of his fraudulent leadership. When it was over, when he was led away in handcuffs, I felt no triumph, no vindication, just a quiet certainty that justice, however imperfect, had been served. In the months that followed, the company transformed. New leadership structures emphasized collaboration and transparency. Financial controls were rebuilt from the ground up. Employee-driven innovation flourished in ways that had been impossible under Dexter's regime. 1 year after Dexter's sentencing, we held a company-wide gathering, not to celebrate his downfall, but to mark how far we'd come since. Production efficiency had increased 34%. Employee retention had reached record levels. Our stock had not only recovered but exceeded its previous high. As I addressed the assembled employees, I saw something in their faces that had been missing during Dexter's tenure. Genuine engagement. Not performance driven by fear, but contribution powered by purpose. A company isn't buildings or products or balance sheets. I told them, it's people working together towards shared goals. Our strength comes from each voice being heard, each contribution valued. After the event, as employees returned to their departments, Pax approached me, the maintenance technician whose workflow redesign had been implemented across all facilities, reducing injuries by 62%. I never thanked you properly, he said, for listening when no one else would. I should be thanking you, I replied. Your ideas have transformed our operations. He shook his head. It's more than that. You changed the culture. People aren't afraid anymore. His words stayed with me as I walked through the production area, observing the improvements implemented over the past year. Safety modifications suggested by line workers, efficiency enhancements developed by shipping teams, quality control measures designed by inspection staff. All ideas that would have been buried under Dexter's leadership were now driving our success. That evening, alone in my office, I opened my desk drawer and removed a small notebook, not Dexter's record of leverage, but my own record of 15 years working under his management. Every idea dismissed, every contribution appropriated, every subtle sabotage documented with dates, times, and witnesses. I had never needed to use it. The evidence of his financial crimes had been more than sufficient for justice to be served. I placed the notebook in the shredder, watching as the pages disappeared. The past was finished. The future awaited. As I prepared to leave, Geneva called. "Have you seen the interview?" "What interview?" "Kara's, Dexter's wife. She's gone public with everything. His psychological abuse, how he manipulated everyone around him, the pressure he put on executives to participate in his schemes." I hadn't seen it, but wasn't surprised. The protective structures Dexter had built were collapsing one by one. "Will it affect the company?" I asked. "Surprisingly, no," Geneva replied. "She's focused on him as an individual, not the business. If anything, it reinforces that the problem was isolated leadership, not systemic corruption." After we hung up, I stood at the window overlooking the main campus. Lights shone in various buildings as teams worked on projects they believed in. The parking lot was still half full despite the late hour, not because of mandatory overtime, but because of genuine engagement with meaningful work. This was the true revenge, I realized. Not Dexter's imprisonment or financial ruin, but the thriving community that had emerged from his shadow. Every innovative idea implemented, every collaborative team formed, every employee voice heard, these were the repudiations of his leadership philosophy. He had built a company on fear, control, and personal gain. We had rebuilt it on trust, collaboration, and shared purpose. In the end, my revenge wasn't destroying Dexter. It was creating something he could never understand, a company where success came from empowering others rather than exploiting them. 2 years after taking the CEO position, I received a letter from the Federal Correctional Facility where Dexter was serving his sentence. I hesitated before opening it, unsure what more could be said between us. The contents were brief. "You were right. Not everyone chooses as I did." No explanation. No context. Just those 9 words in his distinctive handwriting. I never responded. Some conversations are better left concluded. The company continued to evolve. New products, new markets, new approaches to long-standing challenges. The scandal gradually faded from public memory, replaced by recognition of our innovations and workplace practices. 5 years after Dexter's sentencing, we received an unexpected honor, being named Most Ethical Corporation by an international business association. The award cited our transparency, employee empowerment, and community impact. As I accepted the recognition on behalf of our team, I thought about the journey from answering phones to leading a transformed organization, about choices made at critical moments, about the different paths available to anyone in a position of influence. The true measure of leadership, I'd learned, wasn't power over others but power shared with them. Not control, but cultivation. Not dominance, but development. That understanding was the ultimate victory, not over Dexter, but over the philosophy he embodied. If you found this story of corporate accountability and transformation meaningful, please like and subscribe for more narratives that explore justice, leadership, and the human dynamics of professional environments. Share in the comments your own experiences with workplace transformation and what you believe makes truly ethical leadership. Your stories matter, and they help others recognize that positive change is always possible, even in the most challenging circumstances.